Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be making a video showing how I go about reviewing a quadcopter when I've received it for the first time. So my friend Chris has actually gone and bought the FuryBee X215 and he's asked me to set it up for him, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to show how I go about setting up a copter out of the box. And if you want to get into reviewing copters and products, then I can give you some tips on things that I've found when doing this sort of thing. And one thing that is good about this version of the X215 that has turned up is that it seems to be an updated version. So when I reviewed this guy originally, I liked it, but it had a load of noise over the video, and that is because they had removed the RF shielding on the VTX so that it didn't interfere with the isolated IMU. This version has turned up with RF shielding over the top, so hopefully it will have an improved picture, and I'm interested to see that because I know a lot of people bought into this model after my review and they really like it. It's a really nice, cheap model. So I'm also going to show you the gear that I use to do my reviews. It's fairly straightforward. I use this camera here as my main camera. It's a Sony RX100 Mark V. Very important to have these mufflers over the top there because it's very sensitive to your breath and it can ruin the audio, so I've got two of those on there. And the reason why I pick Sony is it's got the best autofocus, and when you are a one-man show, autofocus is everything. And out of all of the different camera manufacturers I've tried, Sony is by far the best, so I go with those. I've even got a spare in case this one packs in. And for a wider shot I also use a Sony A6500 as well, but that doesn't get used as often as the RX100 Mark V. So let's get and put this on the review platform and I will take you through the process. So the first thing I'm going to do is check that the VTX is actually set to 25 milliwatts. And you don't have to do this in all cases, and it's not for legal reasons because who cares about that. But the last time I reviewed this copter, and any copter that had this VTX in it, the VTX ended up dying. I checked the power output, it was like 0.2 milliwatt. And sometimes these cheaper VTXs, they don't have any temperature protection. So if they are running at full power, which I think is like 300 milliwatt on this guy, and they are just going to sit there overheating, it's actually going to damage the VTX to the point where it just won't output enough power to fly. So you don't need to do that every time because some copters and VTXs come, of course, with temperature protection. So you might want to check that before powering up, but I don't think this one does. So to be safe, I'm going to find out how to switch it to 25 milliwatt because a copter can usually sit at 25 milliwatt and not overheat even if it doesn't have any temperature protection. So of course I'm going to want to take a antenna. Now I don't like these pagoda antennas. I think that is RPSMA, but I'm just going to put the antenna on. Very important because you can burn out the VTX at whatever power if you run it without a antenna on there. And then I'm going to find the LED and the button and be as quick as I can. Of course, if you're not reviewing this, you can put a fan on there because the idea is they don't overheat when they're flying because you've got the air passing over them to cool them. So I'm just gonna take a 4S battery here and plug it in, and I found out how to change the power. You've got the button there and it's 3 taps, 1, 2, 3. Look at that, set to high. That's just gonna burn itself out. So you've got 0, high and low, and I'm gonna keep it on low there. Now hopefully it won't burn out. Now another thing that you're going to want to do, of course, is remove this sticker, otherwise it's not going to be very loud. And if you don't want it to be very loud while setting it up, you can actually keep the sticker on and take it off when you are flying. Now if I recall, the channel order on this VTX is weird. That's not going to be a problem for me because I'm using the Furious FPV True Diversity system. I can just scan the channels there, but you want to make sure you're on the right channel. So I wouldn't normally do this next part for a review, but because I'm setting this up for a friend, I'll talk about it anyways. So this copter has come with the XM Plus, however it hasn't come with the RSSI flashed on one of the aux channels, and if you're wanting to know how to check that, at this point you would bind it to your transmitter. And what I recommend is actually binding it with channels 1 to 16 selected, because sometimes they flash it with the version of the firmware that has the RSSI on channel 16, but that's no good because we get more latency doing that anyways. But it's something that I always check, and then I go ahead and rebind it on channels 1 to 8 because, as I say, you get less latency. But what I'm going to do is take this apart and flash it with the version of the firmware of the RSSI on the aux channel 8, and then we'll be able to have that on the on-screen display. So in order to get to the receiver, it looks like I'm going to have to remove the antenna and also this plate that it's on here as well. I think I'm going to need a 2mm hex driver. Okay, that's both of those screws out, and then that just should pull out. Need to be very careful though, and it looks like the receiver is on a little sticky pad as well, so I'm just going to lift it off there. I'm going to have to replace that. As I said, I wouldn't be doing this for a review, and it looks like it's just on a little JST connector there. Okay, so it's actually pretty annoying when they use these little connectors because you can't easily connect them to a Taranis to flash them. I would just love it if we could have a way to flash these receivers through Betaflight, and if you are listening, Betaflight developers, that would be smashing. It's easier when they have the pins on here, but we haven't got that either. So the first thing that I'm going to try is these little test grippers here, and I'm going to try and clamp them onto the solder pads, and then on the other end here we've got some servo wires, and that should go into the back of the Taranis so I can flash it. The only thing is they have put the heat shrink right over the edge there, so I'm going to cut that back and see if this method is going to work first. Other than that, I'm going to have to maybe cut that off. That would be an absolute pain just for flashing a receiver, wouldn't it? Yeah, so I'm not completely convinced these clamps are a good idea, but I'm going to try it anyways. So we have got the voltage on the top pin, then we've got the ground, and then the signal on the bottom. So I've gone onto the FreeSky website and downloaded the firmware. I've then installed it onto the micro SD card in the firmware folder. So I'm just going to go down to firmware, and then we have got the firmware there, RSSI channel 8. Let's externally flash it. Oh, the lights are going. I'm gonna have to hold it very still. How about that then? Seems to have worked, so I'm just going to very carefully turn this off and disconnect it all. But yeah, I quite like that. Okay, so now all of that is back together. I have put a new sticky pad on the receiver, and now it's time to set up a model. I'm using the Taranis Plus because my friend Chris is using a Taranis Plus, and by the way, this isn't dirt. When the GTR 90 caught fire, I stupidly put it on here and it's melted some of the casing. So I have got a spare model here, so I'm going to call this the X215C for Chris, and then I'm gonna page down to the bottom and I'm gonna set the failsafe to no pulses, and then we can see we've got the channels there as 1 to 8 and D16. So next I'm going to check whether the receiver powers up when you plug in a USB connector. I really like this because it makes binding much easier, as you don't have to fiddle around trying to push the battery in, and you can often smoke a copter doing that. So I'm just going to plug this in here. I'm looking for a light on the receiver, and wonderful, we've got a light. So I'm going to go in here and now going to bind it, and we can have the telem off because it's not a telemetry receiver other than the aux channel, which doesn't count. So now I'm going to take a hex driver and press down the bind button. I should feel a click when that goes in there, and then power up, and we should get a green light there. So if I now press exit out of there, unplug this, plug it back in, we should get a solid green light, and we are bound. So now that has bound up, I'm going to remove the USB cable and we'll set the model up. It's just going to be a simple setup here. I'm not going to bother with any inputs. I'm going to go straight to the mixer because we're not having to do any telemetry, and I usually go A for arming on channel 5, and then I usually choose this 2-position switch at the back here, and then exit out of there, and then 6 I usually have as the modes, so I don't bother typing mode, I just put M in there, and then that one I have on this 3-position switch, so you just move the switch there. And then channel 7 I usually have for the beeper, so I'll just put B in there, and I usually have that on this switch here. So I'll just come out of that, and that is all the setup I do when not using telemetry. It's very simple. So I've come onto the computer to check out the Betaflight settings, and if I'm recording I usually use OBS Studio. I've actually got a webcam going on here as well. It's a nice free bit of software, and I usually record the audio with my reviewing camera, and that is just so that there is some consistency between the audio quality of the review and also the Betaflight setup, but I really should get a dedicated audio recorder. But anyways, I've got the copter plugged into the computer via a USB cable, and I'm just going to go into the Betaflight configurator, and the first thing I'm going to do is connect to it, and I'm going to go into the CLI and just check out the version that is loaded. So you can see there it's Kakute F4, and it's actually come with a fairly recent version of Betaflight. Now usually when I do a review, unless it's a really old version, I tend to stick with the version that it comes with so I can check out the setup, but because I'm setting this up for a friend, I'm actually going to flash it with the latest version. And if you want to do that, the best thing to do is, first of all, take a copy of the diff. So this is what has changed from the stock Betaflight setup. So I'm just going to go up here and then copy up to name. Then I usually open up a text file and paste that in there like so. Then I'm going to disconnect from here and go into the firmware flasher. So Kakute F4 as the target. I'm going to choose the latest version. Now there is a release candidate for 3.3, but because it's not a stable release at the moment, I'm going to flash 3.25. I'm going to select full chip erase and the manual rate at 256, and then load the firmware online. And I'm really hoping that this isn't going to work, so I can show you how to correct that. So I'm going to press flash firmware here. It's working, typical. Well, at this point, if you get a error up the top here that says something like failed, what you can do is, I use Zadig. I know there's an Impulse RC driver fixer, but I like to use Zadig. And what you would do is press list all devices, and you'd see STM32 bootloader here. And what you do is you would press reinstall driver. Because when it's failed like that, it is in DFU mode, it's just that it's got the wrong driver and it's not recognizing it. So when you reinstall the driver, it will install the correct DFU driver. But what you have to do then is unplug the copter from the USB, plug it back in, and then select all of this again and flash the firmware, and it works for me every single time. So that's what I do. But anyways, it has flash the latest version. So if I now press connect, and what I'm going to do is go in here, I'm just going to press Control A and Control C. That's going to copy everything. Then I'm just going to paste that back in there, and we should have all of the same settings that they provided. So you need to type save after that as well, and that's going to reset there. So I'm going to press connect. Sometimes it doesn't connect the first time, you have to sort of stop it and reconnect there. So let's take a look at the ports. So we have got the serial RX on the UART 3, for the receiver, which is correct, so we don't need to touch anything in there. I'm just going to enable expert mode. Then in configuration, let's see what I would change here. So we've got D-Shot 600, which is fine. Motor stop off, which is fine. The digital idle, I would usually bump up to about 6 so that we don't get any flips of death. The reason that you might get a flip of death if this is too low is what happens when you're on idle throttle is if your rates are too high, what it has to do is physically stop the motor in order to get that rate, and the flight controller can't act quick enough and it will flip out of control until it sort of recomposes itself. So I tend to find that 6% covers most of these issues, but you sometimes have to play around with it. This is just a figure that I tend to put in. We don't have any board alignment on here, so all that is fine. And as this is an F4, we could probably go up to 8K, but I'm just going to leave that as it is. So we've got the craft name in there as well, and I don't know why we've got camera angle, but there you go. So it's got the receiver set up already and S-bus, so that's pretty nice. We've got LED strip enabled, so yes, it looks like this copter has an LED, so you'd want to retain those LED settings in there if there are any. And we've got OS deselected and dynamic filter. I would also tick anti-gravity and air mode, but if you were reviewing this, you would want to remember what it had out of the box, but I find that air mode is a must for a brushless model. Actually, if you are reviewing a brushed model, brush models don't like air mode at the same time as angle, so I would turn that off permanently for a brush model and just have it on one of the modes there when in acro mode. But for a brushless model, it seems to be fine in angle mode, so I have it permanently on screen display. We want to keep on. Now, dynamic filters is turned on, but I wouldn't usually mess with that when doing a review or when setting it up for a friend actually as well, because, you know, that's something that you really have to go through, checking the temperature of the motors and stuff, and I don't really want to do that. I usually turn USB off here as well, and of course to save any of those settings it needs to do a save and a reboot, so I'm going to do that. And of course I should mention, make sure you've got the props off when you do this as well, so I'm going to reconnect to that. So that was the configuration. So power and battery, these are just stock settings now. I don't think this is set up now because it's got the battery connector there going direct to the ESC board, so it's not going to have any sort of current sensor on there, so I'm going to select current sensor as none. Then I like to reduce the warning cell voltage just a little bit to about 3.2 because your battery will sag and the beeper will go off if you keep it stock, so I just like to reduce it a little bit. And for a review, I won't mess with the scaling, but I will check to see whether the battery voltage is correct compared to a multimeter that I have. So next, if we go into the failsafe, I just like to set it to drop, and we'll test that that works, but not at this point. So into the PID tuning. Now, it looks like actually there are some PIDs in here. I don't think these are stock PIDs, and that's definitely not a stock rate either, so that's interesting. I will usually change the rate to my preference, which is usually RC of 1, and then the super rate at 0.8. So I'm just going to reduce that down there, and then I'm going to lift that up to 0.8, and same for all of these. But what I would actually do, as I'm setting this up for a friend who will probably find that a little bit too much, I'm going to reduce them to actual stock values, which is 0.7. It means that it's not quite as twitchy. And yeah, these PIDs actually, they might be okay because my friend's wanting to run a action cam on the top. I think it's going to be the Run Cam 3. So I might actually leave this because I'm going to be doing the maiden with a camera on the top. And I think I'm going to leave all of this down here as well, and TPA, and let's have a look if we've got anything. So we've actually got anti-gravity gain. I might just bump that up to maybe 3. That's usually a good thing to do, and then I'm going to press save. So let's next go on to the receiver tab. Now I can actually turn the Taranis on here without a battery because the receiver powers up. Might need to put it over the other side, which switch is in the wrong position. There we go. So you can see that we are getting a signal, but this Taranis is set up for TAER. My friend's Taranis is AETR, so I'll have to change that for him. But in order for me to test this, I'm going to have to change the channel map. You can see now we've got the RSSI coming through on the aux 4, which is channel 8 if you count down. So I'm going to stick this on the aux 4 there, and then we'll be able to put that onto the on-screen display. So I'm going to press save on there, and there's not a lot else that I need to do. So something that I like to do as well is, can you see if we just move the copter around on this graphic, we've got a slight yaw there. Now you can correct this in your transmitter with the sub trim, but I tend to find that if you just add a little bit of deadband on the yaw there, you can see if I just keep going up until it stops, and that's fine. So I like to do that. I also like to put just like one also on the RC deadband as well, just so you don't get any drifting. So I'm going to save that, and then if we go into the modes, so wow, it already has modes set up, but it doesn't have arming set up, so I'm going to have to change all of this. So if we go into arm there, and I think I set the arming up on the aux 1, and I can check that with my switch. So aux 1 there, and then I need to change that to aux 2 to match what I did on the transmitter. So we've got angle, horizon, and acro. I'm actually going to keep these in because my friend's transitioning from horizon to acro, so I'm going to leave that in for him. And I don't know why they do all of this. Look at this, you don't need this. Beeper I set on the aux 3, so that's over there, and LED, gonna delete those out, absolutely no use whatsoever. And now if I press save, I just wonder if the beeper will beep. Nah, it probably requires the battery to be plugged in, so we can do that now. Make sure your antenna's on, of course, and then if I check that now, there we go, beeper going off there, and we can arm it. And at this point, check all the motors are going the right way around, so should be that way, that way, that way, and that way. So all of that is the right way around, and while I'm here, we can check the failsafe, so I can turn off the transmitter there, and everything should stop. So I can disconnect the battery now. That's cool, that is all working. So next, we can actually, you can skip the motors tab, but if you want to check the direction individually, then you can plug the battery back in here. But as it's D-Shot 600, no calibration needed or anything like that. If you do want to know which way the motor should turn, a lot of people miss this graphic here, but it's pretty nice. So you can see there, your motor should go in this direction of the arrow there. But all of these do, I've just checked that. So the on-screen display, they have, wow, we've got a lot of stuff on that. I like to customize this, so take crosshairs out, take artificial horizon out, and then I like to keep timer 2 on it there. Battery voltage we want. Did I untick that? I can't remember. Battery voltage, oh, it's because it's got average battery voltage in there. This is just my preference. So craft name I'm keeping in there. Current draw isn't going to work, so I'm turning that off. PID profile I turn off. I don't use average cell voltage because I'm so used to reading a 4S battery, so I'm turning that off, and I don't want disarmed on there either. So it's set up for a PAL camera, but you might need to check that through your goggles. The way that I like to have this set up is I have the craft name down there, and I have the voltage there, and that's not quite in the middle, so I'm going to move that across. That is the flight mode. So if I then go over here, I can turn off the max current, and I can turn off the milliamp use because that's not going to work. Max speed, and look at this RSSI, actually I forgot to put that in, so yeah, we set that up, so that should go in. I'm going to put that in over here like so. And is there anything else there I don't need? Yeah, that's all fine, so I'm just going to save that there. Then if we go into the LED strip there, you can see it's retained it from the original setup. I personally don't like LEDs, but of course if I was reviewing this, I would keep that on there to check them out. And then that is pretty much everything in Betaflight that I'm going to change for this particular copter. The next thing I'm going to do is check out the version of BLHolly that is installed on it. So I've got the configurator here. You need to plug the battery in for this, so I'm going to do so, and I'm going to press connect here, and it's failed, and that's because I haven't disconnected from here. That's an easy mistake to make. So I'm going to go into here and press read setup, and if you want to do the turtle mode and D-Shock commands, then you have to pay attention to the version here, because D-Shock commands only works on 16.7 and above. So 16.6 you'd have to do flash all. So actually I might as well do that to show you how to do that. So you want 16.7 there and then flash, and you'll notice here that this goes across here. It takes a little bit of time to do this actually, and if you are new to this, then you need to download the standalone application now, because I don't think you can get this anymore, but it's very similar anyways, and I'll just wait for all of those to install. Okay, so that is all of those done. There is one thing that I forgot to do though, actually, so I'll just come out of there, and then I'm going to disconnect the battery. There's one command I like to put in, so I'm going to go back into Betaflight, and there's going to be an option for this in 3.3, but there isn't for 3.2. I like to set small underscore angle equals 180 and then save. And what that does is it removes the safety feature that means the copter has to be flat when using an accelerometer in order for it to arm. It's quite useful, because if you are holding the copter like this and you accidentally hit the arm, then it won't cut you up. But if you're flying off a hill, then it's not going to arm whatsoever until it's completely flat. So I turn that feature off. There is one other thing I want to do actually as well. Let's connect to it. I know my friend Chris, he actually uses high volt batteries, and this always catches us out. It actually won't arm if you leave the maximum cell voltage at 4.3, so I'm going to lift it up to 4.6, and that should be fine then. And yeah, that is the full setup of this copter. The next thing to do then is to put the props on. So I know what you're thinking, the video is pretty long at this point, and that is why you don't see up to now. I've put the props on, I've used a little socket spanner that I've got there, and the props go on this way around, so the curves are on the inside and curves on the inside there. And at this point, this is where I would go on the website and look at the specs. I'd also check out the price and compare it to other copters that are going to be competing with it, and I'd look for things that I don't like. So I don't like these little spinners on here. I'd have preferred lock-in nuts myself. I'm noticing a little bit of play in the frame, so it looks like some of these screws need tightening up here. And this board does have the floating IMU, however I can see some wires that might be getting in the way of it, so that's something worth mentioning. And with this copter, they always advertise the camera as being a CCD camera, but it's usually a 16:9 CMOS camera, and I think it's got a 2.5mm lens on there, so I prefer 2.1 these days, but again, that's just my own preference. I'd also weigh it at this point, so I got some scales here. You don't really see that. I don't see any benefit in you seeing how much it weighs, so I weigh it without a battery, and don't do it on the bed because it's going to be useless there. Said 333 grams. Then I weigh it with a battery, so yes, you're going to need to get yourself a load of batteries. I like to use the Tattu Rline because they have a really good lifespan and they don't seem to puff. They are expensive though, and so I'll just turn that off there. And I've also noticed as well that the strap that they give you is absolutely rubbish. There's no silicone mat on there, so it's going to throw a battery in the air, so that's no good whatsoever. I might just use one of these battery straps that have got some grip on them. there, and other stuff. So you're going to need a way to show the FPV feed. I'm using the Fat Shark Attitude V4s at the moment because my HD3s have had the DVR pack in on them and they're Fat Shark at the moment, but I'm using the Furious FPV True Diversity to get the best picture. And I've got a bunch of antennas. I won't be using a Bandicoot antenna because I'm going to be using a cloverleaf antenna, so it's going to be the Invader antenna. But I like to use diversity so we get a nice picture. I usually do a line of sight video, and for that I use a GoPro Hero 4 on a head mount, and I use this wind shield here. It's very important, otherwise you get loads of noise, and I found that even in the strongest of gales this thing works nice. I use the Hero 4 because you can add this extra battery pack on the back so the battery doesn't run out. One thing I'll say about the Hero 4s though, and GoPros in general, is they eat micro SD cards. I like to use these 32GB ones. They are a Lexar and they don't seem to get eaten by GoPros. ScanDisk and all the rest, they just die. I've got a big bag full of dead ones there. Another thing that's good about the Hero 4 is the adapter to add a external microphone is like £4, and the Hero 5 and 6 like £50. So yeah, I'm still rocking a Hero 4 for the hat cam, I like to call it. Sits on my head, and I've also got a chest mount as well, and that is so I can point it down to the transmitter. That's something new that I've been doing lately. So my friend actually wants to run a action camera, so I've got this Banggood strap, and it's going to be the Runcam 3, and that's just going to sit over the top here. I think they do actually give you a little rubber mount for it, but it's just dead weight. I think that's going to be fine on the top there. So I'm not going to do a line of sight flight because I've done that already, but I will do an FPV flight with it. Okay, so I always find it best to do your test flight after you've done the bench review, so with all your statistics and everything, because if you crash it's pretty hard to reverse that, like if you break a frame or something. It's probably best not to fly when it's -4 because of moisture, and also when there's snow on the ground, because if snow gets on your copter when you crash, it's curtains. But it's been snowing here for about a week, so I don't have that luxury. Now they've definitely improved this. I can see I have got a little bit of snow that's come through to the camera, but there is much less noise. A little bit, but nothing I would complain about. So I'm not going to push it too much because I'm setting this up for a friend, but I will check out what the tuner's like. Now I don't have my rates on here, so I was pointing the wrong way there, but I'm trying to do a hesitation maneuver to see what the movement is like. I think it's going to be fine, especially for someone that is still going in horizon mode. And there's a little bit of movement on the eye, you can see there, but again, nothing too bad. Punch is nice. The camera is still 16:9, which is fine, but of course you'd need 16:9 goggles if you wanted to take full advantage of that. But yeah, I think they've improved this copter. So now I'm going to take all of this footage and go back and put it all in Premiere. It's going to probably take around about 6-7 hours to get it all edited, and hopefully this video showed you a bit of an insight into the things that I do behind the scenes when reviewing a copter. But the battery's getting low and it's snowing, so let's see if I can bring it in for a landing. It's going to be tricky in the snow. But as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.